Chapter 9. Atadin was not his family name. Literally it meant Elder Mr. Black. This was the nickname the Council of Elders had given to Nimor, the 70-year-old unpliable who had come to stand as the symbol of the establishment. It was strange to learn that Atadin, though the youngest of the council, always behaved as if he were the head, making sure that nobody bent any of the customary laws, however obsolete. And he argued philosophically that the laws of nature themselves stood the test of time without amendment. It was only man's laws which in a single era were modified so many times that they lost their originality, their essence and sometimes their form. Laws, he held, were made to be obeyed, so that the system of life had form and meaning. What would happen to men, he often asked, if the rain started from the soil and rained towards the sky? Or if suddenly the sun started from north to south? Nature, he believed, was firm and constant, and man, being of the essence of God, must be as unbendable as his maker. Atadin governed his household like a military camp, and nobody at Motsawi could say that there had ever been disorder within it. The children all woke up at 4 a.m. and went about their chores without upset, disturbance or hindrance. This morning, as usual, they all went to the backyard of the smallest hut where they washed their faces. The eldest, a 22-year-old boy, all the married grown-up children having left their father's compound, gave out pieces of chewing sponge. By 5 o'clock, Atadin's 6 wives were up and industriously going about the family business. 3 would be cooking the traditional balls of kenki, 2 would be frying fish in 4 large frying bowls, and 1 would be making the pureed concoction of pepper, onions, tomatoes and salt. By 6 o'clock each child was carrying a tray loaded with chewing sponge, soap and kerosene to sell at the roadside, and by 7:25 a.m. each child was home again to get ready for school. Men who had only 2 wives marveled as to how Atadin managed to run his household in total peace, for all too soon they would find their own wives quarreling whilst Atadin's 6 wives sat chattering happily amongst themselves. When other children were playing noisy games of kwani-kwani or hide-and-seek, his children sat quietly under the high street lamps doing their homework. In fact, Atadin was a dictator husband and father who saw himself as infallible, would take no advice from anyone and, with an iron will, always had his own way. And, as in the present case, he looked down upon the council of elders as fools whom he must lead with his godly wisdom. So now I have told you my mind, he concluded. Remember that what is worth doing is worth doing well. Drink deep, or taste not the juice of the palm tree. But we are having problems, and that is why we must make room for a possible replacement, Afio Mamprobi cut in sharply. Had she been a man she would have tossed Atadin about physically in the wrestling arena, rather than verbally in the council. Very often at council meetings she sat absolutely still, fixed her unwavering gaze on the assertive and dominant Atadin, and frequently chuckled to herself knowingly, making him look as ridiculous as possible. Once in a while, and she was the only one of them who dared to do so, she would remind him that there were 23 of them who had been chosen to represent the Modsawi community, and that he should shut up for the others to say their piece. On such occasions he felt a mild anger at the waste of time it all caused, but he would not eat his words about the importance of tradition by saying that the age-old tradition of having women representatives on the council should be abolished. When everyone had had their part in the great deliberation, Atadin would once again shoot his hand up for attention and without waiting for the linguist to call him, would stand up and address the elders. Chief linguist and fellow elders, we all know why we have come here, and what we are here to discuss. Rather disturbingly, such elders as Afio Mamprobi are making 2 matters out of one. He stood, a towering figure in his flowing robes, dominating the meeting almost by virtue of stature alone. He wore a white silk kaftan which was covered loosely by a flowing 8 yards length of blue and white cotton print. Our ancestors have often reminded us of our duties of loyalty and service to the gods of this fertile land and sea. We have always performed our obligations without a hitch through the chosen vessels of the gods. The gods nominate and we mortals must accept without question, just as we accept the rains and the sun and the harvest. From the priests and priestesses, we know that Ioka, the adopted daughter of the Trinity Bishop, the girl they call Mary, has received the call. Either through disobedience, or lack of understanding, or willful refusal, she has not answered the call. Already the gods have struck with the short mental punishment 8 times, and for 8 times she has refused. What then is to be profited by waiting or arranging a substitute? The gods occasionally accept a substitute, but by my season reckoning it is, in this case, too late. Ioka is the god's servant, and they must have her. If this matter should be raised again at some future time, I shall have no part in it. He strode defiantly back to his stool and sat down as Mamprobi began to laugh uncontrollably. When she came back to herself, she swallowed the gin in her glass, belched out rather loudly and began to puff on her pipe. Nobody had ever been able to scold her because she was the eldest member of the community, and indeed these few contradictory actions of hers could say more than all Atadin's speeches and fine words, and the linguist gratefully took his cue from her. On this last matter, we have received envoys from the Akanidi of Latte who tell us that she wishes to visit us next Friday and stay until Saturday evening. She believes the girl Mary can be released, and a substitute be put in her place who would be acceptable to the gods. Shall we bid her welcome with water and cola? There was a general chorus of assent, and the meeting broke up. As they walked out Mamprobi slipped her hand into Atadin's and they walked together towards the local gym bar. It was their sign of peace and forgiveness. As was usual at this time, Father Okan sat up with little Peter surrounded by all the preparations necessary for an exorcism. As the priest recited in Latin, gesticulating accordingly, Peter, who now knew the conjuration by heart, recited it along with him under his breath. Exorciso tii, onondissum spiritus omnes incursio adversariae, omni phantasma, omnes legio, in nomine Domini nostri Jesu Christi, causa discordii, excitata delorum. Then, in a strong West African accent he turned to the English interpretation. I exorcise thee, most unclean spirit, every incursion in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, cause of discord, instigator of griefs. In the Ritual Romanum the rule was that the devil must be afflicted and insulted, hence the last portion of the recital was given to insults such as injurer of the faith, enemy of the human race, preventer of justice, root of all evil and so on. After the recital of the words, Father Okan sprinkled the dummy on the bed with droplets of holy water and then muttered the following assurance: even Jesus cast out devils as a part of his healing ministry, and from the time of the apostles' exorcism has been one of the accepted functions of the clergy. He moved over to the small crucifix, lifted it and softly placed it on the dummy. Peter made the sign of the cross and brought him an open Bible. Cross, holy water, wine and wafer, conjuration and blessing were regular activities for priest and boy in preparation for the final climax of exorcism itself, now only a week away. The rehearsal over, Father Okan walked with Peter to his dormitory, and then in total exhaustion retired to his bed. Mary's quick glance returned to the letter for the umpteenth time, and her thoughts buzzed. The contents of the letter did not make sense to her, or rather, what it asked surely could not be under the present circumstances. Only a week to go. For the umpteenth time she went to the wardrobe to examine the green frock and matching hat that Charles had bought for her. The dress was a midi and went perfectly with the shoes her mother had bought. Although Mary was slightly thinner now, the next-door seamstress had agreed to make any necessary alterations to the dress at a price of 15 cedis. Mary crossed the room and went to sit on her bed and, looking once more at the letter, she read aloud, from the office of the Board of Governors concerning the ceremony for the handing over of the senior prefect's duties and privileges. Mary smiled sadly, and continued to read. The outgoing school prefect will mount the rostrum with the scroll, sword and Bible, the symbols of her office and power. She would deliver the customary 15-minute speech describing the main events of her reign. The traditional 1 minute of silence signifying the death of the old order will be strictly observed. Then she will call her successor. The customary 1 minute of hail to the new chief shout will be allowed. And then the scroll, sword and Bible will be handed over to. Mary's vision became blurred, and then all at once her eyes were blinded by tears. She had looked forward to this moment of her life 7 years ago and had imagined her parents sitting proudly at the high table, their faces beaming with smiles of congratulation. Now, with only a week to go, those great 20 minutes of a lifetime had been cruelly stolen from her. Her tears flowed uncontrollably until worn out, but with the letter still clutched tightly in her hand, Mary fell into a sad sleep. The days running up to the planned exorcism seemed endless to the anxious participants. It was a matter of course now for Professor Eastman and his wife to dine with the Quarcoopomes at least once a week, and over the course of time, the two families had become close friends. When they had finished their dinner, the two couples retired to the lounge. As usual, it was Professor Eastman who, referring to Mary, made excessive assurances that all would be well. "We have only a week to go," he told the Quarcoopomes. "After that, your daughter will be whole, just as she was before." Life is but a variety of pain and pleasure. It had become a habit for Bishop Quarcoopome to skip evensong at 6 only to reproach himself later for his faltering self-discipline. As was usual after the wine, Zandria had passed around the hot slices of ashanko, a homemade spicy cake made from overripened plantains, and as usual the four of them had later walked to Professor Eastman's Benz 450 and driven off to his home. There the professor and the bishop would play chess while the two wives talked endlessly about homemaking and gossiped about their husbands' all-time achievements. At around 10 p.m. the Quarcoopomes would leave for their home where they would retire to bed praying fervently that their daughter would soon be free of the troubles that tormented her. Charles wore a smart, cream-colored safari suit and gold chains adorned his neck and wrist. His hair was neat and shining and his skin was healthy and bright. It was the result of a conscious revival of self-awareness and self-respect from the recent weeks of near shabbiness. Just 4 days ago an anonymous note had been dropped into his pigeonhole at the hospital. It had read, "Brighten up, man. You are shaming the profession with your appearance." He did not attempt to deny the truth of the statement. Instead, he decided to show one and all that he was still as handsome as he was brainy, and that he had an overloaded wardrobe of fine clothes. Wearing a well-tailored three-piece suit yesterday, he had received more than his fair share of smiles from the female nurses. Now, as he stepped out of the highly polished cream Datsun 260C, a small chuckle escaped his mouth in reaction to an amusing thought which had just flashed through his mind: he looked handsome enough to be a film star. With a silk handkerchief he flicked off some barely visible dust from his Italian-made shoes. Leisurely he walked into the reception room and just then the signature tune of Radio Ghana sounded from the small speaker in the ceiling. It was exactly 6 p.m. on Sunday, the precise time of his appointment. The nurse stared at him absent-mindedly as he talked, and he realized that she was admiring his appearance. Suddenly the side door opened and the Akanidi entered. "Charles, welcome." "Good, I had a hunch that you might be around." "You look very well today, it must be my herbal tea." "Thanks Adobia, I am in fact training to be a film star for Ghana television," Charles joked playfully. They both laughed heartily as they turned and entered her immaculate office. The first thing that Charles noticed as he sat in the comfortable armchair which Adobia had waved him to, was the steaming cup of herb tea. "Good grief, Adobia. How many of these cups of tea do you drink a day?" "Oh, just 3 on hard-working days and 2 on less tiresome ones." "Have one." A cup of the steaming herb tea was brought in, and Charles took a sip, almost immediately noticing its soothing effect. "Charles, to business." No single second or minute is ever repeated, hence time is valuable. "I have done all I can with the help of the cosmic guides to see what aid we can give to Mary. The going has been uphill, but already I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I am sure we shall be able to build a bridge across the river which will enable Mary to return to her former self. We have 6 days to do that, you and I." "Listen carefully." Adobia paused, and then looking at Charles full in the face she continued in earnest. "In order to pacify the gods and to persuade them to consider a substitute, you must give them a drink of holy water. That will quench their thirst for Mary. According to tradition, the water must come from the source of the Densu. It must be virgin pure. You must fetch it in the horn of a cow. 2 cows are a part of the offering, and you will need a further 500 cedis to pay to the substitute family together with 6 sacks of corn. Charles, the price is small when you consider that it will save Mary's life." I personally am not worried by the price at all, but really whether Mary's parents will agree to all this. Well, that is their business. They are bent upon an exorcism by the ritual Romanum system. Then you must convince them to try our method as well, if they will not see that such a rite cannot work in this case. Their method of exorcism costs nothing, whereas the pacification I have suggested will cost nearly 1,200 cedis, but I do know that it will cure in a split second. Let Mary's parents know that I myself am charging nothing. If they continue to be difficult, then remind them that Christianity adheres to oblation and sacrifice, and that fetishism adheres to the same. Tell them that a fetish-born malady is cured only by a fetish sacrifice to the gods who really do exist. We do not take the broken-down engine of a car to a carpentry workshop, but to a garage. I cannot help those people, Charles, who are dogmatically against me. Remember, anytime that you are ready with the necessary accessories, before Saturday of course, let me know, and your Mary will be whole. As Charles drove homewards, he considered how he could best approach Mary's parents, but he could see no way around the problem. The Quarcoopomes had, he knew, dilly-dallied several weeks ago with the idea of seeing the Maudsley elders. However, they had, he believed, considered their reputation higher on the scale of importance than Mary's health. Now, to ask them for so much money for the Akanidi would be like adding insult to injury. It simply would not work. He joined the ring road at the Liberation Circle and headed towards the Orion Cinema House. There was to be no film there tonight, but 3 bands would be giving a live concert supported by a cultural display. Mary would enjoy that, he thought, after this afternoon's bad attack. It seemed there could be no natural end to these Sunday attacks. The latest had been the most violent. Although handicapped by a shoulder that had been in bandages for several weeks, the unnatural strength and energy she assumed at these times still seemed to come in uncontrollable surges. With virtually nothing left to harm herself with or to destroy, Mary had hurled a solitary chair at the wall with total ease. Suddenly she had begun to hum, then to dance her fetish dance towards Charles. Realizing the danger from past experiences, he had moved towards the door. Outside the room he heard a loud crash as his expensive radio was thrown to the floor. These things no longer bothered him. Somewhere in his system he had developed a complete understanding of Mary. Their chemistry was perfectly balanced, and that was how he was able to withstand her violent bouts and she to put her complete faith and trust in him. On several occasions Charles had turned over inquisitive neighbors away in order to protect Mary, and as he drove home now, he felt prepared to fight anyone who dared to gossip about her. As he drove the car into his yard, he noticed the lone light in Mary's bedroom. Mary ran into his arms as a greeting when he stepped inside. It had become a daily convention with them, and Charles knew that the vibration of the heartbeat and the magnetism of the human body had their own soothing powers. From the Akanidi he had learned that the masters called this the healing touch. Mary disentangled herself from his embrace and Charles crossed over to the record player with its large loudspeakers and put on a soft tune in Okan called Ebeyi, meaning it will be alright. By 5 minutes to 12 Mary's attention was focused exclusively on the concert music of the Ramblers band, playing live at the Orion Cinema. Once in a while she would hold her left shoulder as if it pained her, but otherwise she was a part of the great show. "Excuse me, Mary. I'll be in the gents for a few minutes. Will you be alright?" "Sure, fine. I don't want to miss a second of this show," Mary replied, her face radiant with enjoyment. Charles made his way outside the metal gate and found his Datsun 260C. It was gleaming beautifully in the moonlight. He nosed it out of the parking lot and headed due south. In 2 minutes, he was rounding the island property, the precious building owned by the State Insurance Corporation. It was the headquarters of a multi-million life insurance business, a supermarket, a beer bar selling no less than 15,000 cartons of beer a day, an international charter surveyors, several large real estate businesses, and by all accounts, gold and hemp racketeers. Charles had heard all the strange stories about island property, yet to him the building looked too old and respectable to house such shady dealings. As the green light came on, he passed the huge but empty UTC shop and wondered absent-mindedly why they were advertising certain products when they were not available there. Another red light stopped the car. This place was stinking. It was the grocery side of the Makola No. 2 market. This side was purely in the hands of the Shylocks from Lagos. They were dirty, toothless old women who pretended to know nothing about bargaining, and always insisted on their own fixed prices. If you dared to argue, they would lecture you about the effects of OPEC oil hikes, the cost of transport, tips at the borders and bribes for policemen. If you were still stubborn after this, they would show you pictures of Somali refugee camps where, they said, they could easily send their wares for United Nations cash. Charles smiled grimly to himself and turned right as the green light came on again. He made for the narrow bank lane and parked in front of Trinity Cathedral. The night watchman, recognizing him instantly, opened the yard gates for him and, without salutation, Charles strode purposefully in. He rapped loudly on the bishop's front door and a few seconds later he heard the sound of footsteps coming towards him. The door opened and Father Quarcoopome's surprise was clearly visible at seeing him so late at night. "Is something wrong with our Mary?" he asked Charles anxiously. "No, sir. This time the problem is my own." "Coming from the code, Charles." "What is it?" the bishop asked, still concerned. "It is my trouble, but the inconvenience is yours, sir. I need your help more than ever before, but I cannot tell you why." "Tell me, Charles, tell me what I can do." "The Lord will provide for a just cause." Father Quarcoopome urged Charles to speak, full of relief that he had not come with bad news about Mary. Charles took a seat and found himself unable to meet the old man's steady gaze. "It is money, sir, big money. The trouble is that I need it, at the latest, by Tuesday. My salary will cover it at the end of the month, but to wait that long would simply be too late. If I don't have the money by Tuesday, my profession and reputation will be lost at Carl Budot. Just tell me, Charles. How much? Say it, and if I can't help you myself, I shall speak to others who can." "Sir, it is 1200 cedis. Only?" Father Quarcoopome asked in obvious surprise. Not waiting for a reply, he left Charles and walked upstairs. He soon returned with a small slip of green paper in his hand. It turned out to be a Ghana Commercial Bank check for 1500 cedis to be drawn at the High Street branch on Monday. "Charles," Father Quarcoopome said, and this time it was his own gaze that fell to the floor, "you can completely forget about a refund. Look on it as a fortuitous gift from God. The extra money can be used before your payday. Is that all right?" Charles sat down dumbstruck. How could he ever have doubted the bishop's generosity? Who was it who said that when God closes one door, he opens another? In a hoarse voice, he stammered out his thank you and shuffled heavily to his feet and out of the house. As he sat behind the wheel of his car once more, he heard his own voice utter a prayer of thanksgiving. He ignited the engine and headed the car for Liberation Road, which ran straight to the Orion. He realized that he had been away for at least half an hour, and he ran up the entrance steps two at a time, hoping that Mary had not missed him unduly. He shielded his eyes as he entered the large cinema hall. Across the maze of heads he could see Mary fumbling her applause as the electronic guitar reached its climax of deafening decibels in a solo performance. Mary hardly noticed him when he took his place next to her, so engrossed was she in the performance taking place on the stage. They left the Orion at 2 o'clock since Charles was working early that morning. On the way home they called in at Carbu where Charles made a trunk call to the Latte Shrine. "All systems are go, Adobia." "Good. I shall inform those involved tomorrow by messenger, and as scheduled the cleansing ritual will take place on Saturday evening." "Okay. I shall see my butcher tomorrow, get an excuse from duty and dash to the Denso, and I have enough money now to buy the special breed of cattle." "You have done well, Charles. I admire your determination and efficiency. 10 of your sort would be enough to bring sleeping Africa to her feet." "Thank you, Adobia, but remember this is a special case for me, otherwise I am rather slow to move as you probably remember. They both laughed. Sorry to have bothered you, Adobia. Good night. You mean good morning, Adobia reminded him. Correcto perfecto, he sang into the mouthpiece and placed the receiver back in its cradle.